Wow, that last week was weird. My wife taking over and all of that. I know she made great food and she's actually a better baker than me. But this week we're back with me and I am making Swedish Kringlor. So Kringlors are a sweet kind of twisted cookie, basically, like a butter cookie that has its origins with the pretzel. So they're actually going to look an awful lot like a pretzel. So be ready to cook Kringlor with me on Cooking with Mr. Tolley. All right, because we're baking today, there's some specific things that you always have when you bake anything. This is a leavened dough, which means it's risen. And what causes it to rise in this case is baking powder, which makes it a little bit more similar to a cake or a cookie, which you have the same kind of thing. That's why cookies are fluffy, cakes are fluffy, is you have a reaction that causes the baking powder to release gas, which traps up and puffs up your food. So the basic things that you always have and that you're going to have for this are flour. In this case, I am using 5½ cups of all-purpose flour. There are different kinds of flour. I'm using all-purpose just because the recipe doesn't indicate a different one, but there's pastry flours, which are a little lighter. There's bread flours, which are a little denser. All-purpose flour will work fine for you. When measuring flour, it's really important to not scoop with your cup measure. Instead, you would scoop with a smaller measure, dump into your cup until it's full, and then wipe it off. And that's because when you scoop flour, you actually compact it down, and you could end up with a lot more flour than you actually meant to have. So going by weight sometimes with flour works better, but in this case, we're using cup measures. Along with the flour, you're going to need 1 cup of granulated sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 cup of butter, that is the same as 2 sticks of butter, which is 16 tablespoons, 1/2 cup of milk, and 2 eggs. Now, sometimes Kringlor are covered with something called pearl sugar. I'm not going to be using that because it's not in the recipe in the Cultural Night Cookbook, but if you want to, it kind of makes them prettier and it actually makes them a little bit sweeter. If you've ever gotten the Christmas cookies from, say, Costco or places like that, you have the ones that have sugar on top and the ones that don't, so it's kind of up to you there. So for a large part, this is actually a pretty simple recipe. There's not a ton that you have to do to make this work. You're going to be basically mixing everything ahead of time and then adding melted butter in. That makes it kind of like a sugar cookie or a butter cookie, actually. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start adding things together. So I'm going to start with my dry ingredients. I'm going to take my flour, my baking powder, and my sugar. I'm just going to whisk those together. All right, now we'll start in on the wet ingredients. So we'll add in our milk and 2 eggs. Now, I'm not gonna use the whisk to mix at this point. That's a personal preference. I find it gets a little bit harder to mix when you get to that point. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a fork. I like forks for mixing dry and wet ingredients together, especially when you have a lot of dry and not as much wet. What ends up happening is you get this kind of stiffness in the dough. All right, so as you can see, this is still a very, very loose, very, very dry dough. So that's where we're going to be adding in our 1 cup of butter. There's a couple ways to melt butter. The easiest and simplest way is to just do it on the stove top. It's actually easier to melt it on the stove top than it is to melt it in the microwave because there's a lot of water in butter, and water, when it gets hit by microwaves, will fizzle and pop, and you could cover the inside of your microwave with melted butter. If you want to do that, put it into a microwave proof thing and do it in short bursts, so like 15 to 30 seconds max. If you're gonna do it on the stove, which is what I'm going to do, you're just gonna want to pay attention to not get it too hot, otherwise you start to cook out the proteins and you'll end up with browned butter, which you don't want in this case. So I'm going to add my melted butter. It's kind of funny, I was just thinking, a brown butter Kringlor actually sounds extremely delicious, but that's not what we're making today, so I'm not going to do that. So yeah, I'm just going to mix in my butter. Now, it is very likely, because of how stiff this dough is, that I will have to mix with my hands. My butter is hot. I do not want to mix with my hands in the hot butter. That would be a bad idea. I'd burn myself. So I'm going to mix it in a little bit, which will help cool it off. And once we've hit kind of this consistency, I'm going to get in, I'm going to mix it together with my hands. All right, there we go. One of the nice things about a butter cookie like this is that they get real flaky. This is going to be an extremely flaky food. I'm going to now be rolling these out. So according to the directions, what I have to do is make golf ball sized balls, put them onto a countertop that's been sprinkled with flour, and then roll them out into a pencil length and pencil thickness line, and then I'm going to twist them into a pretzel shape. Now, one quick bit of advice to make your life way easier is to use something like this. So this is a Silpat. A Silpat is a silicone based kind of thing. These are great for using in the oven. If you don't have a Silpat, you can always use a bit of parchment paper or even some saran wrap. The saran wrap will stick a lot more. What this allows me to do is this allows me to do all of my work on my surface with all this flour without making a gigantic mess, because I can just pick up my Silpat afterwards and clean it off. So if you don't have that, you can do it directly on there. Just be ready to clean up a mess, especially you kids. So I'm going to take a ball, or take some dough, I'm going to roll it into a ball to make sure I got my size about right. That should be good. Oh, it's a little small. So if you don't know, golf ball's about 1 inch in diameter. There we go. Just picture hitting this on a golf course if you happen to play golf. So then I'm going to take it, make sure it's nice and compact. I'm going to roll it. And if you've ever made Play-Doh snakes, that's kind of what we're doing here. We're rolling these out to make Play-Doh snakes. It's possible, because this is such a flaky dough, that you might have to get in there and put it back together every once in a while. But just a nice, delicate rolling motion. You can see mine splits a couple of times. I don't mind the splitting. That means that they're going to be real nice and choicely flaky when they're done. Let's see. Here's the thing. That's about the length of a pencil. I think it's a little thicker than I want, so I'm actually going to pat it out, roll it out a little bit more. I'm not going to roll these simply because they are as flaky as they are. I'm going to do, with my fingers, kind of stretch them out, then I'll roll them afterwards. There we go. Okay, now a pretzel shape. There are lots of ways to make a pretzel. I'm going to be coming up from the bottom, twisting around, and kind of tying a knot through. So I'm going to leave a loop here. I'm going to cross over myself and then back in. And that is a pretzel shape. As an ugly pretzel shape, I can always reform. If you don't get it the way you want, you can always reform them and go from there. But have fun. They don't have to be pretzels. They could be twists. You could make ribbons. You could make bobs. You could make infinity symbols. You could make Mobius strips. So whatever you want to do. I'm going to go with pretzels because it's kind of traditional. So let me get one of these done and we'll show you. So loop it up and around. Bring it over. Across with an X. And there. There's my pretzel shape. Now this is where practice comes in handy. The more you practice, the better these look. But you can see it's kind of pretzel shaped. I'm gonna go ahead and get ready for the oven. Now this is gonna take me a good bit of time because there's a lot of dough, so I'm not gonna film all of this. I'll show you them when I'm done before I put them in the oven. All right, so here are my shapes before I put these in the oven. You can see I have a whole tray here of just the traditional pretzel shape. I also had some fun with different kinds of rolling techniques. I did some braids, I did figure 8, I did a triskelion, I did a wreath shape. The one thing to know when you do these bigger pieces, these are going to take a lot longer to cook. So it's going to be about 12 to 14 minutes for the pretzel sized ones. These ones are probably going to take up to 20 minutes because they are so much bigger. There's a lot more to cook. So anyways, make lots of Kringlor, send me lots of pictures, and I hope you had fun cooking with Mr. Tolley.
Dad, did you remember how to show them what the cookies look like?
Oh no! She's right, I should have shown you guys, sorry. So this is a finished Kringlor. Avin, do you want to try one with me?
Yes, please.
Let's see what they taste like. Ready? Are they yummy? All right, guys. See you next week.